We have an incredible episode of North State Rocks podcast. We have this time 3 separate people on the podcast. The first is Wyatt Hanson with the Willow Creek Ranch. He's had 9 confirmed wolf kills on the Willow Creek Ranch and then 1 confirmed kill in Sierra County. So 10 confirmed kills. He feels like there's quite a few more, which is just heartbreaking. But please, really excited for you to listen to what he has to say. In addition to that, we have Richard Egan, who's also a Lassen County rancher and former CAO, County Administrative Officer of Lassen County. His ability to tie the rancher to kind of county, state, and federal policy is just amazing. And then lastly, we have John McGarva, who is our current Lassen County Sheriff, on the podcast and talking about just the incredible impact that just wolf depredations and wolf activity has had on his day-to-day. He's actually the primary lead that goes out and deals with these, and he's dealing with 2 to 3 calls a week that he personally himself is trying to handle. So incredible episode, really excited for you to listen. Please share. This is an important issue for Northeastern California. Please listen and share.
Welcome to the North State Rocks podcast. Discover the hidden gems and extraordinary people of California's North State region. Join Perry Thompson, CEO of Hat Creek Construction and Materials, as he explores the vibrant communities and interesting neighbors that make our region a great place to live, work, and play. Tune in, be inspired, and rediscover the North State. This is your community. This is your story.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. Excited for another episode of the North State Rocks podcast. Today, we're doing something new. We haven't had multiple people on at the same time. Today, we're really excited to invite back again Richard Egan, who has been on with us before, did an awesome job. Richard is a local Lassen County rancher and has a lot of experience with county policymaking. He's a former CAO at Lassen County. Super excited to have him on the podcast. We have Wyatt Hanson, who is with the Willow Creek Ranch. I get that right, Wyatt? So Willow Creek Ranch. Excited to have you on. You're kind of more boots on the ground, front lines of been dealing with some wolf kills directly, which we're very sorry about, but we're excited for your perspective on what it really looks like in the real world, instead of a lot of people just speculating. And then super excited to have John McGarva, our current Lassen County Sheriff. John, thank you so much for joining us. And what I love about John, John is one of the sheriffs in the state that is just in the middle of this challenge that everybody's dealing with. And I would say a terrific partner to the ranchers and the people in the North State. And I wish every county was blessed to have a sheriff like John. So excited for all 3 of you guys today. Really excited about it. So what we want to do is really this isn't a pro-wolf or anti-wolf or anything like that. So what we're really talking about is what it looks like in the real world when people make policies that affect people's lives and livelihoods and the real challenges that we're seeing up here in northeastern California. So, with that, I think maybe we start with Wyatt. Why don't you just give us a little bit of background about where your ranch is, how long your family's been around, and just a little bit about your background, please.
Yeah, born and raised in Lassen County. 4th generation rancher here in the Willow Creek Valley, just outside of Susanville. That's me and my father and my brother. All work on the ranch here, and we're cow-calf operation. And we've been here my dad moved up here in 1982. But like I said, my family's been here, my mom's side, since 1904.
Wow. Awesome. That's terrific. And then Richard, kind of give us your background. I know people have listened to the podcast before, but why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, and really excited to have you on.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Perry. We're newcomers relative to the Hanson crowd up there. My family's been up here raising cattle since 1970, and we graze in several different counties, but in the summertime we're up in the Plumas National Forest a lot with some grazing allotments and some private leases that we have up there. And that's where we've been encountering the trouble with the wolves over the last several years. And we're, I think, similar to the Hansons in predominantly a cow-calf operation, but we take our cattle all the way through to slaughter by sending them to Colorado, feeding them out there, and selling them when they're ready to go. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Excellent. And John, let's give us a little bit about your background. Well, obviously, we know you're Lassen County Sheriff, but you're again, not only are you dealing with, you bring a unique public safety element to this that I don't think is talked about enough. And then also, just your deputies are one of the on the front lines with the ranchers. So if you could elaborate a little bit about your background and a little bit about kind of what you're seeing from your side of the world.
Well, thank you. I took over as sheriff in 2024. Excuse me. I grew up in Lassen County, grew up in Westwood. Family's got a strong ranching background. My extended family still maintains a ranch in Modoc County. So I've spent a lot of time, especially when my dad worked on ranches, and spent a lot of time working with them. Different things as I was growing up. The public safety portion of this has been really, I got kind of involved in this in early March, late February, when the Dixie Valley Ranch was experiencing some serious issues up there, and they were starting to have the wolves coming closer and closer to residential areas. They were within 50 feet of a house or less. Really started to show that they are becoming more and more habituated to humans. It's not a concern to them anymore that we're there. We're not, humans aren't a deterrent. So it's became a public safety issue where, they weren't running from humans anymore. They were just hanging out, seeing them during the daylight, just the change in the wolf behavior. And then we're seeing more and more contacts in the, during the daytime and openly. It was definitely atypical to wolf behavior, contrary to what we're being told by Fish and Wildlife. So that's kind of where I got involved. And then just it just seems to continue to escalate over this past year, especially in our county. I've been trying to stay focused with what's going on here, even though I know that our neighbors have experienced some serious depredations in the Sierra Valley. But that's where I got drawn in. And from the public safety standpoint of, there's no real mechanism for us to address the wolves as they're coming in, unlike with mountain lions or bears, where I can issue a public safety threat directive or depredation of the animal. I can't do that with wolves because they're double protected. So it's really been a challenge this year for us to work through that. But that's basic.
So I think I understand that, John, but I want to be clear. You literally are handcuffed from, hey, I think this particular wolf is a public safety issue, and I'm in charge of public safety for all Lassen County, but you literally can't do anything. So you have to. So what do you do? Like, hey, these wolves are around this house or within 50 feet of this house. There's some, I'm just trying to paint a picture that, there's young children here. And I know, I'm not saying that's the case, but I am saying if you had that example, that extreme example, what would you do? What can you do and what can't you do?
So there's still a mechanism in the law that if they are a threat to human life, that with any animal that you can defend yourself against that animal. So if they're on your property and they're threatening your children or your family members or yourself, then yes, you can take action to try and deal with the threat. That's still a mechanism. Even in the Endangered Species Act, there's allowances for that. The problem with the public safety standpoint is the chances of me or one of my deputies being there when that occurs is very slim. The county of Lassen is about the size of the state of Connecticut, and there's a lot of ground to cover, and I only got so many deputies to cover it with. So really, it's dependent on what the person thinks when they're there, and then there'll be a full-blown investigation from the state more than likely that comes in and handles that. So now we're having to you're almost justifying your actions almost a reverse you're guilty until proven innocent mentality that
Right.
comes with that. And that's
Yeah.
that's unfortunate. Like, you have to prove that you were threatened.
Yeah.
And I've seen some videos from different ranches up there where, wolves have been aggressive towards people or ran at people, and not just up there, but everywhere. I mean, I know that Wyatt and Richard and I both talked about these things at length at different times. They are becoming more aggressive towards the public. And that's where I come in, and I'm trying to push the issue forward, saying this has become a public safety. As the sheriff, as you said, Perry, I'm in
Right.
charge of public safety, and I'm not going to allow this to continue. But I still got to work within the laws in which I'm framed with. I can't authorize people to violate the law either.
Yeah. Understood. Wow. Okay. All right. So Wyatt, can you take us through what an actual wolf encounter? I may be wrong, but I think you've actually dealt with this firsthand with a kill. Is that accurate or not?
Yes. Yeah. No, our first kill was last November 7th. And since then, we've had 9 confirmed kills. And we've had others that were not able to be confirmed because there was not much there. Some were unknown, again, because there wasn't the ability to confirm it. We also lease a ranch in Sierra County where we had 3 kills there. Again, 1 confirmed, 2 went unknown. And with that, we have our county trapper out. We've also had the state come out, and they've looked at the kills. They've investigated them. And then after that, after the first one especially, you really start getting nervous for your animals. Certainly when you're out at night, you get nervous for your own safety when you're around. It just really gets you on high alert. We've seen the wolves a few times. They tend to be fairly elusive. We don't go out and see them every night, every other night, every week. I wish that were the case, because then you'd be able to prevent some of these things from happening. So when you go out at night, you hope not to find anything. Of course, if you do, then you don't have a lot you can do, but hopefully chase them out of your field and hope that you don't find a kill with that. This year, we've seen them a little bit more presence. Luckily, we have not had a kill since early December of this year. But with that, like I say, it's just a very eerie. It's an eerie feeling when they're here. I don't know how to explain it, but it's just a feeling that you have. And like I said, you don't see them every day. You don't see them every night. You don't see them every other day. But when they're around, you certainly know it. Your animals will act weird. Your dogs will act weird. Your neighbors, they'll act strange. And it's just certainly something that takes a greater toll than just losing an animal or having an animal killed by them. It certainly changes how you feel about the ranch and how your life is and your sleep patterns and everything else.
Holy cow, Wyatt! I've talked to a lot of ranchers that have had kills, but you are I've never heard, me personally, that I've talked to. I haven't talked to anybody that has the amount of destruction that you have dealt with and devastation that you have dealt with. First of all, my condolences for you and your family. I'm so sorry to hear that you've been so directly hit by this. I apologize. I knew that you had dealt with at least a kill, but I want to make sure I heard that right and our audience heard that right. So can you tell us how many on the Willow Creek Ranch? And then I heard the ground up in Siskiyou County too. So how many here, Lassen County, we're talking about? We'll probably be a little more specific. And then can you just go through that one more time on the number of kills and when they start? You said November. Was that November of this year or the previous year?
On November 7th of last year was our first kill.
Okay.
For us personally, a neighbor had an animal that was run onto our pasture, and that was the first interaction that I had with wolves. We didn't really know that they were around. We know that they certainly could, and it was possible. And I was going out, checking the heifers like I would any other day, and there was one heifer that didn't get up. And as I drove over, I noticed a blood trail, and I surely thought the heifer was dead. And I got up to the heifer, and she stood up, and just blood just came out of her rear. Just they literally tore her from the outside to the inside. And just so happened to, unfortunately, it was a neighbor's that was run through into our fence and in with our heifers. But since that day, personally, the Willow Creek Ranch lost 6 in 4 that fall, 2 in the spring of 2020 or 2025, and then so far this fall, we've had 3 additional kills. With the last one being early December here. In the ranch that we leased down in Sierra County, we had 3 investigations with 1 being confirmed kill that was actually with a partner. And the other 2 kills, one had wolf DNA on it and it could not be confirmed. And the other one was actually probably one of the first wolves seen on that side of the mountain, up towards Washoe County. Actually, is where it is. It's right there at the border.
Okay, so we've done one other podcast on wolves. How do you have wolf DNA on the animal and then that kill is not confirmed? Can you explain that to me? I'm really struggling with just a common sense approach to that.
I wish I could explain it myself. I talked with multiple people about it at the state, and they certainly gave a response that they were willing to adjust it to an unknown kill. I still consider it a kill myself. We actually, the calf that was confirmed was killed a few days later, and it was a confirmed kill because they put a camera on it, a game cam, and it had the wolf come up to it and sniff on the carcass. However, the investigation used the DNA that was taken off of our calf to confirm that kill, when of course the other way around, because we didn't have a picture of a wolf because there wasn't a game camera on it. Ours was not confirmed. Since then, it seems that certainly with the rest of the investigations, we've been more successful in it being a confirmed kill. As we know, with a confirmed kill, you are compensated, or you're supposed to be compensated one day. But with that, also, you just, in my mind, you want to make sure that this is represented correctly and that every kill or investigation at least has somewhat of a record that will go to the state and will get out on these wolf reports and will not go unnoticed, if you will. And so that's why I say that we've had all these investigations, and I do have the confirmed kills and the unknowns, and certainly I believe that there is enough information there for it to be a wolf kill. But I guess I understand where the state comes for some of these investigations to make it confirmed. But with that one, yeah, I'm not entirely. I still can't come to terms with it.
Yeah. So, I think the thing that people miss is that, getting compensated for the animal is just a kind of the tip of the spear that the ranchers are dealing with, right? So obviously when the herd is under, puts the whole herd under stress, you're just saying how weird the animals act and the dogs act. I mean, I've read the statistics about weight loss for the entire herd, conception rates going down, miscarriage rates going up. Just when the herd is under that kind of stress, the rancher is being hit, all these ways that just aren't easily documented, right? And so it's not really a blame thing. I'm not saying, that I have the perfect solution, but what I do know is that the current, paying for the animal that's only confirmed kills is just a fraction of what ranchers are really dealing with. Right. And more importantly, I think, I don't want to speak for you, but it seems like it would make more sense to give you guys the tools to manage it properly in conjunction with law enforcement or whatever that looks like. But before we get to solutions, I guess I'm trying to talk more about making sure people understand the real cost. So can you take us through, since you've had so many kills, Wyatt, can you take us through what compensation really looks like right now and what that process looks like and how long it takes and whether, I'm being told, I've heard that it's market value. I've heard that it's not market value because market values are pretty high. What does that process and the end result really look like on the ground?
Yeah. So once it's confirmed or probable, you then take out the proper paperwork and you fill it out, and you have to fill out certain other forms, of course, to make it all legitimate with the state. So there's that portion of it that makes sure that obviously it's taxable and everything else, and they have a trail for that. But then you have to produce some detail, some evidence of how that animal, how much money that animal is worth, and where you came up with that number. So what we did is we were able to bring over the past few years and take an average of when that animal was sold, how much those animals typically would weigh, and then we try to find a comparable price for how much that animal is worth today. There's various ways that you can do that. As the time we've had to, it seems like we've had some mix-ups with the state in paperwork and dates. I think we were about to be paid once, and the funds might have gone or might have been starting to send the final check to a Willow Creek Ranch that's down in Central Valley. I had to look up where it even was. And so we had to restart the process, which again is fine. It's supposed to be a fairly simple process, but we seem to be having enough mix-ups where we have not been paid yet. We're certainly in contact with the state. They're not hiding from us or anything else, but it has been a bit of a process that we certainly would wish was an easier to deal with. With that, I think the confirmed and probable, like you said, does make sense for the individual kill. And certainly I hope and I think that the state is looking towards other roads that we can go to get some more reimbursement for the weight loss, the aborted calves, the culling of cows. We've culled 2 cows that were from these calves because they were not uncontrollable, but they certainly were not an animal that we would typically keep from their experiences. And again, yeah, I'm not sure how we get to that number and how that will be presented. Certainly, I know Richard and I would be part of that process, or have ranchers part of the process when they do try to fix the funding as to what is a more real number of the effect of the animals. And I will add, I know we're talking a lot about the compensation, is of course we always still wish that this was not something that we have to do, of course.
100%.
And I just want to be able to say that. Like, I know that we're talking about the numbers and the animals. Of course, we just wish that we could take this animal to market and we sell it like we do with all the other animals. Because it's just such a small portion of what the problem is what can be solved with this compensation program as it is right now.
Perry, if I could just comment on the compensation program, that's that's gone on, and we've been dealing with this since the beginning. The department is incredibly incompetent in administering the compensation program. And I think it stems from, well, a couple of things, partly their culture, but also the Department of Fish and Wildlife has never really wanted to deal with any compensation program. In fact, both compensation programs that have been established have basically been forced upon them by legislature. The legislature in, I think, 2022 forced $3 million on them, which, in my opinion, and I always like to say they played Oprah with the money. They threw the money away with a lot of grants, what they call them grants, to people that really had no wolf impact. Basically, you put in an application and they sent you a check, and Wyatt and I and many others told them, hey, you guys are going to run out of money pretty quick if you're doing this like that. And they completely ignored the industry people and continue to do that, because I think they just wanted to get the money out of there and be done with it, because that was a pilot program. Well, when that pilot program ran out, like we had told them it would, the legislature then forced another pot of money on them, which now the pendulum has swung the other way. And my understanding is they're basically hanging on tight to that $600,000 and haven't paid for depredations since maybe about a year ago. They haven't paid any. So, we'll get to solutions later on, but I think one of the solutions is to get the compensation function away from CDFW, because their culture and their competence just isn't there to administer a program like that.
Yeah. Well, and Wyatt, you just told us, in fact, I was going to come back, but you had your first kill over 13 months ago and you haven't been compensated for anything.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
That is true. Yep, that is accurate.
Holy cow, that is such bullshit. So, yeah, we have plenty of funding to have, hazing teams and, but we're not getting the people that are being impacted the money. They're being impacted at the most important level. But I bet the paychecks for all the hazing teams I bet those cash every month or every week. I bet. So, yeah. Okay. So that's super interesting. I'm super sorry about that, Wyatt. Yeah. So Richard, thanks for kind of jumping in and talking about that. So that $3 million, can you just talk about that $3 million in grants? Like, give me an example of a grant that was awarded that you know of, and what?
Yeah, sure. So in 2022, the legislature, like I mentioned, kind of forced this pilot program onto the department, gave them $3 million to deal with compensation. And the department decided to do that in 3 different prongs. One being direct loss, like Wyatt's talking about, direct animals that were killed. One being deterrence, and the other being this pay for presence notion that we've all talked about, the economic impact of having wolves in your cattle, even if they're not, if they don't kill one, or if the kills are not detected, is probably more accurate. So, and in my opinion, and I think a lot of other producers, they went about it completely backwards. They spent almost $2 million of that on non-lethal deterrent activities, which are all these crazy things that they should have learned, and we told them don't work. And there's been a long history in other states showing that range riding and putting up tinfoil tinsel and things like that are not effective long-term deterrents, right? They might work for 5 minutes, but particularly out on the landscape where I graze, there's really no effective non-lethal deterrents. But yet they were, paying people to buy dogs and having night watchmen and all kinds of crazy things to the tune of $2 million, including people that had no wolf presence in their area. So they blew through that money. That's the Oprah money. Then they spent, out of that $3 million, I think they spent 135 or 40 on the direct loss. out of the 3 million. The rest of it, until they ran out, they used on the pay for presence for impacts that we all had, for having the wolves there. Which and that part of the program actually, I think, had some issues with how they determined where the wolves were and so forth, and they were very secretive about that information, and continue to be. But that seemed like a more fair approach to compensating people for the loss. So that was the 3 million. They ran out of that, and I think the department thought once that money was gone, they were done and they didn't have to do it. They published a report and went back to taking care of predators. And then the legislature this last year came up with another 600,000, and I think they're, true to form, they're kind of resisting getting that money out there where it belongs. And one other thing that maybe we'll talk more about this is they're using the confirmed numbers of kills in a lot of statistical reporting and so forth. And in my view, that's just really a fraction of what's going on. In the Sierra Valley episode that we had this last year, I think that it's really highlighted. And for people that don't understand the Sierra Valley situation, Sierra Valley is a relatively open, flat area with a lot of cattle, a lot of roads, and relative to the rest of the area where the wolves are. Really a lot of presence. So it was highly visible what was going on. But in the rest of wolf habitat, like where Wyatt is and where my family grazes up on the Plumas and perhaps Siskiyou County, Modoc County, there's a lot of depredation and harassment that's going on that is completely undetected. Personally, myself, we had several kills in 2020, 21, 22, and all of them detected by collar data from where the wolves were. The department kind of gave up on collaring the Lassen pack about 2 years ago. And surprise, surprise, we haven't had any confirmed kills because we don't know where they are. They're out on, 75,000 acres, and you're just not going to find them. But anyway, sorry to ramble on.
No, that's good. So I want you to elaborate on gave up on collaring the Lassen pack. So gave up because it's convenient and then we don't have to deal with this, or literally the logistics of collaring were overwhelming? Kind of elaborate on that for me, please.
Yeah, and I don't want to attribute to malice what can be explained by incompetence, but I think there's a little bit of both going on with the department. Collaring is a specialty. It's not rocket science, but it's a specialty that is, most efficiently done through trained helicopter teams that go out and collar animals, right? And they collar deer and they collar elk and they collar, every species you can think of. But for a long time, the department, because someone got killed in a helicopter accident 50 years ago or something, they decided that helicopters were not a good tool to use them, and they used that excuse for a long time to not collar wolves. And they tried ground trapping, and they had some real limited success in ground trapping, but they did have some success. But wolves get smart to those traps, and they don't fall for it anymore. So a couple of years ago, they finally relented and began using helicopters to collar these wolves, and they had some, by the way they do that is they hire a contractor to do that, and they come in and do it. But for example, with the Lassen pack, there hadn't been any collars on those wolves for quite a while. Last year, the extent of their effort to collar those wolves was one helicopter flight from the Susanville airport. They flew to Greenville, turned around and came back and gave up. It was literally a 30-minute effort. And that's just not, that's not going to get it done. And so a lot of us have been advocating for them to do that. And the other thing about collaring that I'll just mention is once you have 2 collars on a pack, it's really easy to find them and put another collar on. So as long as you have 2, when one fails, you can go collar another one, and then you have that pack collar. Now, for some reason, they just don't seem to understand that math. And I'm not a biologist, but it doesn't take a rocket science to figure this out. So that's why, I think some of it is malice. I think some of us affected by the Lassen pack have been very vocal about the lack of competence with the department, and they're I don't know if it's retaliation or just they don't want to hear from us, so they're focusing on other packs like the Sierra Valley pack or the Squaw pack. So hopefully that answered your question.
No, yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. Yeah, I mean, I think about the money that we're spending and the energy that we're spending, to track and collar, and I just seems like it's just so misdirected. And that 3 million and that 600,000. Does anybody on this call have a feel for what the impact to the taxpayer that these programs have? I mean, really? I mean, I'll bet you that there's not a clean category that all of this is being charged to that could be tracked very well.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And again, and I hate to pick on the department all the time, but it's hard not to. They are the most non-transparent agency, maybe second to corrections, but in the state, it's very difficult to get any information out of them. And this is information that should be readily available, how they spent money and what they spent it on. They claim that they have no money for years and years and years, and they don't have legal authority to do things like what they did last summer. But then when the heat gets warm enough, they're able to dump several $1 million in Sierra Valley. Yeah, good. I've personally made public records requests to the department, and they're very good at avoiding them. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so John, can you share with us just a little bit about how, from the law enforcement side, just what effect wolves are having on just your day-to-day operations? And you have a huge county, and I know you really care about ranchers, and that is the way of life up here in northeastern California. So can you just talk to us a little bit about where your deputies are spending time, and some of the things that you guys are seeing and your deputies are seeing on the ground level?
So thank you. So we kind of joke that this wasn't something that any of us thought we would be doing. When I took over as sheriff, I joked with Richard about this all the time. If I had known I'd have been a game warden too, I think I'd have thought about it. He goes, "Well, I just wouldn't have told you." So it's really occupied way more of our time than we ever thought it could. Between having to either field the calls or respond, and I do most of this myself because my deputies have plenty going on. So when these come in, I generally deal with them myself. We've joined in the effort of starting to DNA these wolves that Sierra County had done forever, where we're taking DNA samples and we're storing evidence that we didn't traditionally ever store before. We're now responding to these things. For the first time ever, the State Sheriff's Association has stood up a wildlife conflict committee because of the wildlife issues. And then it's not just wolves. Obviously, we have mountain lions and bears across the state that have been an issue as well. But for us here in Lassen County, I mean, it's been occupying easily 20 to 25% of my time and effort, if not more, because I have a lot of travel time to Sacramento, where I went to a lot of meetings to basically, like Richard talked about, get sold a bill of goods on what the efforts are. And when you ask for any kind of additional information or transparency, we get told, well, we can't tell you that because it's detrimental to the wolf, which is bizarre to me because I don't get to say that in a Public Records Act request. Trying to track these wolves themselves, getting them collared is an effort in itself. And obviously the Lassen pack has almost no collars on it, where we have the Harvey pack, and there's at least 6 packs that directly affect the Lassen County area that we've had to now track and go through those things. And I talk to at least every couple of weeks, I'm talking to the trapper about what's happened next. Our numbers are somewhere, and I think this is probably a little light, but we have 42 confirmed kills this year and 45 with 45 total that we believe are probable. I believe the number's higher, but a lot of these, like Wyatt had alluded to, there's not enough left to test. There's nothing, you can't test what's not there. They're so decimated, the carcasses, that we can't even get a DNA sample. There's nothing to take. So really, it's become a constant. It's rare when I'm not, at least at some point, 2-3 times a week, addressing an issue with the gray wolf in Lassen County, and it's become a real occupier of my time, and I don't mind doing it. I think from a public safety standpoint that if we don't start addressing these things, we're going to start seeing things like Siskiyou County just declared a public safety emergency because they had one within a half mile of a school that was hanging around there. I don't think we're far from those issues in Lassen County. We've had them hanging around ranches for a long time. They're out in the daylight now. We had one that was down by Honey Lake that was hanging out down there, and then eventually, of course, what happens? We have a kill down there. Obviously the Willow Creek Valley, they now have a pack to themselves. They have the Tunison pack that's sitting out just outside their back door. Richard's dealing with the Lassen pack on the Plymouth side. We have, Ashpan pack and Harvey pack and all these things that directly affect Lassen County. So we're spending a lot of time managing a predator, and which is I wouldn't say taking us away, but definitely has revised our priorities on what we're going to deal with from a law enforcement standpoint. And these are things that traditionally were not our role. We hadn't had much of a role in this until it started to affect the public safety aspect. And at this point, now I'm in. I mean, now that we're in, in for a penny, in for a pound. So we're working hard to address this issue. I'll be attending a stakeholder meeting tomorrow in Sacramento regarding gray wolves and where they're at, and really trying to push them to move out their wolf plan from phase 2 to phase 3, so we can start treating them like the mountain lion and the bears that are public safety issues. We can start working those things in. And really, that's been our push and our lobby at the state level. I've joined, probably a dozen other sheriffs, and there's 3 of us that sit on the committee that are constantly in Fish and Wildlife's ear about pushing these things forward. Excuse me. It's really been a solid occupier of most of my year this year. I've spent a lot of time dealing with gray wolves, either reviewing incidents, talking to the trapper, and it is a big county. I wish I could respond to every single one, but it's difficult to do that. But we are taking evidence off of them now, and because of the DNA testing is not reliable, or they tell us that, oh, it's not conclusive, well, we can send it to this lab and it says it is, and then they try and dispute the findings of that lab. They're spending more money trying to prove it's not than just saying, okay, it is.
So there's so many questions I have from that, but I'm going to try and so a couple things. One, just an observance, just common sense observance, is the explosion of your time and your resources, and again, just contrast that for just a few years ago versus what's happening, and then every one of these wolves have 7 to 10 pups every year. And this, we're talking about, it's not a linear curve. It's an exponential curve that's happening right now. And just look at how practices from your law enforcement group has changed just in a few years, to where this is occupying a significant amount of time. If this continues unchecked, it's going to be overwhelming for all of these rural law enforcement agencies, and not to mention, the ranchers that their livelihoods depend on this. And so I guess what I'm most confused about, John, and everybody on this call, is what is the overwhelming force that's driving this wolf untouchable mindset? Like, we just can't transition to any type of lethal activity or real management if this continues unchecked like it's going, it's going to be ugly. I mean, what is it? Kids are going to have to start getting killed by these things before it matters. I mean, why are we not recognizing this? And then where is the same empathy for these people that are animal lovers? Okay, I get that. All of us are conservationists. Nobody wants animals killed. Nobody is here saying, but where is the same empathy for deer and elk and heifers and cattle? Where is that empathy? So you're in Fish and Wildlife's ear. Can you explain what your perception is of why those things don't matter, but everything wolf does matter? That's what the disconnect for me is.
Well, the information they're putting out is in my view slanted, to say the least. So when they talk about deer is a good example, right? Anybody that is a outdoorsman or a hunter knows that the deer population is down, and it's down drastically.
Yes.
I'm a deer hunter myself, and I went last time I was able to hunt was a few years ago, and I didn't see a deer, a legal buck, the entire season, which was a zone that normally, I'm pretty successful in. They instead of crediting it to predators, they credit it to wasting disease, or some kind of internal issue with the deer herds, or poor reproduction rates. They don't want they push the numbers to where they show that it's not the predators, and that's their standpoint. Their standpoint on the gray wolf is that this is an epic resurgence of an extinct species. Keyword there is extinct. The California gray wolf went extinct in 1929. The last one actually was killed in Lassen County. This is a Canadian gray wolf. By all size and comparison is larger, more aggressive, different type of animal than what was in California. And that was not a resurgence. This was an introduction. By all involved know that this was a migration and introduction into California. This was not this epic resurgence of a species that the Fish and Wildlife Department is claiming. And then where they want to hang their hat, and that's where this gets really frustrating, and a lot of times, especially from a law enforcement standpoint, is when it comes to accountability, you're able to point to it, right? There's a law, there's a statute. Well, right now, we have fingers pointing both directions. We have the state saying that it's the federal laws that are not allowing this. The feds are saying the state's managing this. And quite frankly, it is the state that's managing this for the most part. When the feds get involved, it's usually, especially under the current administration, it's been handled fairly swiftly and fairly quickly, which has ruffled some feathers at the state level that I've experienced. That's what their hang-up is. They're doing everything they can, and that's why the advocacy groups aren't involved when it comes to deer and elk, because they're being told that that's not, the predators aren't killing them, some natural phenomenon is. And some of that's probably true. There is probably some disease and stuff that goes on. But that's not the majority of it. I mean, the picture we go back to is in Sierra County. You had that elk that was killed on that doorstep, and those pictures were very telling. That clearly was not wasting disease. That was very clearly an attack and a kill on someone's doorstep. But they even tried to blame the homeowner for that, saying that they weren't doing enough to deter the elk from coming into there or the deer from coming in there. They shift the responsibility to anything but the predator, and that's the frustrating part of this, is that just the lack of accountability. There's way more wolves than they want to admit to. According to the statistics, the average is for every collared wolf, there's 3 to 5 with it. And I'm sure Richard could correct me if I'm off on some of these. And then you already hit the litter amounts for each litter they have, and those can be more than once a year. So there's plenty of wolves at this point. There's no reason they can't push to the next phase where this can be handled. It's just a reluctance to do so. Even the advocacy groups, when it came to Sierra Valley, said that's not what any of us had in mind. But, and they're looking at a regime change with a new director and everything else coming in January. I don't think it's going to change the philosophy of the department any. It depends, but that's where they're hanging their hat. It's the blame shift, and it's nothing new. Richard and Wyatt have been dealing with it for a lot longer than I have as the sheriff. But at this point, they don't even want to admit that there's a public safety element here. They try to deny that at all costs, because they know at that point that's what got the sheriffs involved, and that's where we're having to address these issues that traditionally, you're right, were not ours. When you talk about comparison, 3 years ago, this wasn't on our radar. This was something we were aware of, but really was traditionally a fish and wildlife issue that we really had very little involvement in from a law enforcement standpoint, because it was happening out on the ranges. and the kill rates were not. I don't know if they weren't reported as high, and I don't know if that's because the numbers never got to us or the information was different. I'm not sure, but I can tell you this: we're definitely more involved in the information now and very active. I mean, we're now having monthly meetings with Fish and Wildlife that we didn't used to have because of these issues, because we've had to bring a voice to this. And I have no problem rattling the saber on the right topic, and this is one of them. This is something that becomes a safety issue because it's still someone's property. We talked to someone the other day in a meeting. My wife and I were there, and the equivalent is what if someone reached in your wallet and took $3 to $5 grand out of your wallet? How do you feel about that, or more?
Right.
Right. And then you see people you see the information, click like, okay, and then there is then there's just the threat of presence themselves. These are a pack animal. I've seen videos of them charging at vehicles, charging at different things. This is not something that's going to end cleanly if this continues.
Yeah. And Perry, I think your question's a little bit rhetorical about why do people have this such affinity for wolves but not other species, and from my perspective at least, I think it's a lot of it's based on misinformation that and also just some kind of irrational emotion that that the wolves are viewed as this magical creature that's going to somehow balance the ecosystem in California. And John mentioned this is a different wolf that was here back 100 years ago. But a lot has changed in California in that 100 years. I think there was, a couple million people in California back when that wolf was killed, and now we're approaching 40 million, and we've got highways and we've got airplanes and we've got, all sorts of different things that are conflicting with these animals. And so trying to understand the psychology is probably maybe for another podcast, I guess. We could spend a lot of time on that, but the legal hurdle is that the wolves are now protected both federally and state, as we know, through the ESA. And I don't think you could find a legitimate, credible biologist that isn't owned by the environmental groups that would suggest that this species is endangered or threatened. There's thousands and thousands of these in just the lower 48 states, and many, many more in Canada, North, Alaska, and so forth. And so the time, I think, has really come to acknowledge that there's really no reasonable definition of endangered or threatened that would fit this species and manage them accordingly.
Yeah, I would agree. And so, that was a really good point, Richard. Thank you. And then can you also touch on kind of the changes that have happened to, my son is a hunter. He loves hunting. And I have a friend that used to bear hunt a lot. And, slowly over the last, decade, you can no longer use dogs to hunt bears, for example. Bobcats, I think you can't hunt anymore at all. Can you just kind of elaborate just on this kind of lead with predator protection? And again, this is that the deer and elk, like, they don't matter. So I'm just, it's bigger than just the wolf. It's just predators in general, right? And now the tip of the spear is wolves. So, but could you talk a little bit about that for us?
Sure. So, and we deal, Wyatt and I deal with these other predators as well in our cattle herds, and the bear population particularly is just grown exponentially after the restriction that dogs can no longer be used to hunt them. And but the bear cattle conflict is a little different than the wolf cattle conflict. Bears typically will, come in and they can decimate baby calves, young calves that are, maybe under a month old. But typically after, cattle are, up and of that age where they can move around, the bears don't harass them that much. And so, for that reason, a lot of us, when we go up to the forest with our cattle, we only take cattle that are of that age, and they can kind of deal with that. But there's a lot of bears up there, and there is still some depredation. Mountain lions also. And by the way, with bears, if we do have a conflict issue, although the department has been increasingly making it difficult to get permits, there is a process to allow for permits to take bears that are harassing and killing cattle. Same thing with mountain lions. But mountain lions, again, there's exceptions to the rule, but typically aren't going to be after those larger animals. If they are, mountain lions are solitary hunters. They're not going to come in and wipe out a bunch. They might kill one and you'd find one. Unless you're in the sheep business, then you might have 50. But typically they're not as much of a problem up on the forest because of the age of the animals up there and the nature of the way they hunt. Compared to wolves. And if we do have a problem, there is at least a mechanism to try to deal with it. Wolves, there is none.
Okay, that was great. Thank you. All right, so John, you talked a little bit about, hey, we're in phase 2. We need to move to phase 3. Can you just talk a little bit about, what that looks like and what you think it's going to take to get us over that hump?
That's some of the questions we're going to have tomorrow at this meeting, is that we're going to try and figure out what it is they want to see before we take that. They base it a lot on mating pairs and per pack and what they can track and what they can't. As we talked about already, the statistical numbers show that there should meet the 6. First it was 4, then it was 6, now it's 8. The goalpost moves pretty often on what they want to see in order to make that happen. And that's what they base it on, is the mating pairs. Honestly, they have more than enough. If they're able to expand the amount of packs, we have packs from Siskiyou County to Tulare County at this point. So I think there's more than enough evidence to show that there's enough to move to that next phase where we can take action in a public safety standpoint, or if we are having an issue where we're having, say wolves hanging around, Wyatt's property and they're starting to become a threat, then maybe we can do those. Then we can take action and move on to those things. They're still being pushed at the federal level to try and delist. We're working with our congressman and those things on trying to get the wolves delisted through the Fish and Wildlife Service. It's obviously always an uphill battle because they did this in 2022. They were actually delisted. Then it immediately got an injunction from an activist group in a lawsuit. So this is always, the goal is to get them delisted because they really shouldn't be. There's, I believe, over 10,000 is considered the population of the gray wolves. They're starting to move into Colorado now, including us. And there's really no justification in a lot of people's minds to show that this is still an endangered species. So the fact of the matter is the push is we have to be able to show or make them prove why there's not enough to move them to the next phase. That's going to be some of the discussion tomorrow because, there's been a lot of research done on these. UC Davis has done quite a bit. They've done several presentations for our local ranching community in several counties. They can show that there's more than enough, but the data's not, they're not accepting of the data. They're saying that the data is skewed or it's flawed, or that's not what their research shows. And that's part of the transparency when Richard talks about PRAs and different things. That's why they don't want to let information out, because they feel like that if we know how many are out there, then we know how to take the proper action and how to deal with that. Plus, it's harder to defend once the numbers get out. But right now, I don't think they know how many there are, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
I think it's important to maybe just drill down on the process a little bit, because you've got a couple things going on. You've got the federal endangered species list, you've got the state endangered species list and act, and you've got the California Wolf Plan. Now, I think there's some debate to be had about this, but the state could adopt a wolf plan that allows for the type of management that John and others are mentioning. But if that plan was deemed to be in conflict with either the state or the federal Endangered Species Act, that it may not be implementable. So I think it's really important to note that in order to have any meaningful change in the management of the species, there has to be a change to both the Federal Endangered Species Act or delisting, or a change to the State Endangered Species Act or delisting at the state level. Because the management plan, as important as it could be, is going to be subject, I think, to those restrictions that are in the ESA.
Well, Richard, you know that delisting is like a snowball's chance in hell. So realistically, where does that really leave us, with solutions?
Well, on the federal level, yeah, and I think, the consensus is that it's going to be difficult to impossible to get done. But there is potentially a vote, maybe as early as today, in Congress regarding that Livestock Pet Safety Act, which would take care of the federal part of it. I think you're right. At the state level, even though the data doesn't support listing, the irrational emotion that prevails in Sacramento is probably going to make it remain listed for the foreseeable future, and which kind of leads us into the way that the state and feds were able to lethally take the 4 wolves in Sierra Valley, and that's kind of an interesting discussion too. I don't know how deep you want to get into that, but the way they were able to do that is really quite interesting.
Yeah, so go ahead and elaborate on that for us, Richard.
Sure. So essentially the Federal Endangered Species Act and the State Endangered Species Act contained language that says you can't lethally take or harass or any of these endangered species unless there is a demonstrable threat to public safety, and nothing to do with livestock. The wolves could kill every cow in California, and that would not be a reason to take the wolves. But if there's this demonstrable threat to human safety, then wolves can be managed essentially. And so and let me back up just a little bit. Because they're protected by both the state and the federal ESA, there's a memorandum of understanding between the state and the feds. And that basically says that the state has the responsibility and authority to manage the species. My understanding is, and I haven't read the whole thing, it's probably 1,000 pages long. That MOU doesn't really specifically deal with the situation that happened in Sierra Valley. And so both the state attorneys and the federal attorneys decided that in order to take any action, both agencies had to come up with independent findings of this demonstrable threat to human safety. And then if they did so, then they could take action. And that's what they did. In my opinion, they got bullied into doing that, and they did the right thing for the wrong reasons. They didn't kill those wolves in Sierra Valley because they killed 100 cattle. They were able to make those findings because there were wolves near a school and near, people's backyards and things like that. So there's really no legal mechanism to deal with livestock conflict, and despite the press releases that they made detailing all the livestock kills and so forth, that had nothing to do with why they were able to manage those wolves down there. And I think that remains the challenge. Like I mentioned before, in Sierra Valley, you got, relatively a lot of people, you got a lot of traffic, you got a lot of cameras that, forced them into making that decision. Up at Lone Rock and out at Willow Creek and Antelope Lake and other areas, they're not going to fall for that. They're not going to, they're not going to make that finding that there's a threat to public safety, despite the fact that they're killing just as many cattle. And frankly, they're probably just as much of a threat to somebody at camping at Antelope Lake as they were in Sierra Valley. So anyway, that I think remains the challenge, is finding a way to manage these wolves for cattle depredation and other livestock and pets.
Well, I think to Richard's point, if I may, I think that's exactly right. I think that's what made Sierra Valley unique was its topography, and everything was in that bowl of the valley and right on top of each other, and it was just a constant basis. I think that's where we have struggled in getting them to see our case here in Lassen County is just the distance in between everything, just the fact that we have such a large area that is being covered. Like Richard said, we're experiencing the same problem. We just have more space to spread it out over, and I think they're using that as a reason to not, jump in and do these things. And he's absolutely right. And until they, this was never about the livestock. This was pressure, and this was the public safety portion of it that got this forced through. And really, until the feds stepped in, this was going to continue, I believe, at the state level. They were not in a hurry to address this problem.
And just to kind of put it in numerical perspective a little bit, I think there were give or take 100 confirmed cattle depredations in Sierra Valley over that period of time, spread across maybe 20 ranches or so. There are a lot of cattle in that valley. But if you average that out, maybe that's 5 or 10 depredations per ranch, which is less than the Hansons are experiencing in Willow Creek. Yet Director Bonham, sent the cavalry to Sierra Valley with every fish and wildlife agent he could muster and millions of dollars, and essentially abandon the rest of the state wolf issue for at least that period of time for the last 6 or 8 months.
Yeah, all of our kills are within one fence line of our homes, our corrals, our working areas, our barns. So it just goes to show that, of course, just like over there and many other places in the state, that they didn't mind people. I know it's a small people presence, but it's my family's presence. So of course to us it is a public safety issue. It's a family safety issue for us. And just speaking to some of it, in Oregon they do have a federally delisted zone, and I know that some folks are looking at that and working at that, but there should be a federally delisted zone in the northeast corner of the state, and the state should look at the same thing as a state delisted zone. And I don't know how that's done. I'm not on the government side, but certainly it seems that at least there's some more mechanisms and tools that can be used when that's the case. And I know some folks are looking at that, and I think that should be seriously looked at.
Another point, Perry, a lot of people are making the Sierra Valley episode out to be a really unique and unusual situation. And from my perspective, and I think probably Wyatt and John's as well, these are just wolves being wolves. They're no different than the wolves that are in Westwood or in Willow Creek or any of the other areas. They're just highly visible, and they had the opportunity over there with a concentrated area of cattle to do what wolves do. And I think it's crazy to think that, and like some of the groups will tell you, this was just a unique situation, and if things had been done differently, they wouldn't have become habituated and that sort of thing. I will call that out for what it is, which is nonsense. These are just wolves doing what wolves do.
Yeah. I would say the Sierra Valley is just a leading indicator of what's to come everywhere, right? And it was a more visual place to have it happen. Yeah, which is that's the advantage, the disadvantage that where we are. So Wyatt, tell me if trying to have a reasonable proposal as a rancher on the ground, if I could do X, what would X be to have you feel like you could sleep better at night and manage your herds better? Is lethality? I mean, basically I can kill them. Is that the only option? Is there something that can you just, I kind of wanted to hear from you on what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah. Well, we have a small pack. the Tunison pack. And like I said, they can be fairly elusive. You don't see them. They work at times when they watch you and they know that you're gone and you're not watching. And I think that with these problem animals, problem packs like the one in Sierra Valley, there has to be some lethal control. There isn't. Every other state, as far as I know, that has wolves. And without that tool, they certainly are not afraid of some of the more extreme hazing mechanisms. We've tried flaggery. We've had the scare boxes. We've had lights. We do the range riding. We go out at night. We go out in the morning multiple times, and it's just very frustrating when it seems as those tools do not work. And we've certainly seen that. And I know that we're not going to fix. They're not going to go away. I understand that. And to an extent, that's fine. I mean, that's what it's going to be. But I just think that without some lethal control, like they had in Sierra Valley, like they had up in Oregon, just in Lake County, I think it was a year or two ago. I think that wolf had 8 depredations, and it was considered a nuisance, and they took that wolf. And in my perspective here in Willow Creek, we have 9 confirmed kills of a small pack like this. I have neighbors who have had kills. I don't know the exact number of all of them, but I certainly think that would be the threshold for taking an animal like this. We're a smaller valley. Again, we don't have as many people, but we certainly have enough ranches and enough human presence around these animals that I think in this instance, lethal control should, and probably if it was a tool the state could use, I think that they actually would probably act. But maybe that's the optimistic side of me, to think that they would if they were able to have that tool.
So, John, we went from phase 1, which is do nothing, to phase 2. Can you elaborate on what phase 3 really means if we get to it?
And I mean, basically, it means that we can treat them like a mountain lion or a black bear if they're a public safety threat. It gives us a mechanism in order to address a threat. I can even issue a public safety order on a mountain lion if it's attacking, enough livestock or enough, if it's close enough, like what Wyatt's dealing with up there. If that was a mountain lion, that would be a non-issue. I could just, say, here's the track record of kills. Here's what we need. Here's what's going to happen. And I'm going to go ahead and declare it a threat. I could do that with those animals under the Fish and Game Code. I have that authority. That's what phase 3 really looks like, is our ability to manage that and be able to at least assist those who I'm elected to represent, and protect their safety. It gives me a mechanism to do it legally. Now, there are some other mechanisms in the law currently which allow for that. Richard elaborated on the Code of Federal Regulations that talks about the demonstrable but not immediate threat to human safety. That was the wolf in Lake County, Oregon, that they killed. And that's backed up by case law and People versus Wallen out of Montana, which dealt with a grizzly bear that's on the endangered species list. It shows that if it's a threat, threat to human safety or public safety, it can be taken out under certain circumstances. That's where we're held up with the wolves, is the dual protections, and they don't have that opening in the law. Now, obviously, that's what we want to get to with phase 3, is at least have the ability to deal with it. The wolves aren't going anywhere, and Wyatt's elaborated to it. They're here to stay. We're not going to get them out of here, and killing them all is not really an option. That's not really viable or really realistic in that manner. They're here, but we have to have a way to be able to manage them and get them, at least deter them away from human contact and away from these things and seeing them as a threat or not safe to go after. And right now there's no deterrent for them. That's why we're seeing them during the day. That's why they're openly, going after, cattle during the day, especially in Sierra Valley, and then up where, everywhere in Lassen County, they're still seeing them. We had one down in the southern part of the county near Honey Lake that was an open daylight. There's no deterrent. They're not afraid of humans or anything about humans right now. phase 3 would at least give us the ability to deal with them in a more serious manner, whether it's lethal or do the things we need to do to get them out. And until they have a healthy fear of human contact, or at least see it as a deterrent, they're going to continue. They're emboldened, and they're going to continue to do both things because there's nothing stopping them to doing them at all hours.
Yeah.
And the other thing, and I don't, maybe it's Pollyannish to think that the department could embrace modern technology, at least under the current leadership or probably the next leadership. But there's plenty of technology that's coming out that might be beneficial to both the wolves and us as producers. Wyatt and I both are in the process of exploring and doing some pilot projects with virtual fencing for our cattle, where the cattle with a collar on their neck will be kind of like a shock collar on your dog, will be bound through some fencing. And I don't, maybe that's not today or tomorrow, but maybe in the next few years, if the department would embrace modern technology and some innovation, could find some way to collar these things and keep them bound in certain areas. And I don't think you'd have to do, for example, an entire pack. If you were able to keep the alpha male and female of a given pack in a certain area, then the rest of the pack's gonna remain nearby. And you don't see anybody in the department or anybody at the state level even entertaining these types of ideas. They philosophically, I think, want the rest of the world to adjust to the wolves and have no compromise in terms of of wolf management. And but I think there's opportunity there to do it if they got the right leadership.
Well, and Richard, you have a good point. On the last podcast I had about wolves, Jessica was talking about a wolf kill report she was reading, and I don't want to misquote it because I'm not an expert on this, but I believe she was saying that 95% of the kills at that particular report that she was reading were on private land. And does that sound accurate to you?
I think it's all over the place. Out of my 5 kills, I think 4 were on private land and 1 was on public land. Hanson's probably are mostly private. All private. So yeah, a lot of, and I don't know if that's, I don't know why that is, but it does seem to be more private than public. In my case, it's private timberland, but.
Yeah. Well, and it might be like on the BLM grazes and those things, it's probably more difficult to have a confirmed kill up there because the damn thing's just missing, right? You can't find it. Yeah. It's not, Wyatt's able to ride every morning and check, on his private land. But it's a little harder on the large graze leases and stuff. But the reality is, getting back to your point, right, is that if we figured out, things that work like that, and you're basically trying to deter them and keep them more in the forested lands that's not privately owned and that ranchers are operating on, right? That's the goal. So
right.
It doesn't seem like an unreasonable proposal.
Yeah, and in the Plumas, and I think the Lassen National Forest is very similar, and the BLM's probably not far behind them. There's an enormous number of vacant grazing allotments on these forests for a variety of reasons. Let the wolves go live up there all they want. I mean, they're going to have to eat jackrabbits and mice, but because there's no deer left. But
yeah.
I think that's the other issue as well. I think that's the other issue as well is when they've tested the scat off of these wolves, it's 70-80% beef. I mean, they've really habituated themselves to eating cattle at this point. And that's science that you can't deny. I mean, that is an actual number that we found. So they're here to stay, and that's probably why they're staying closer to these allotments or the private lands, because that's where the meals are. And let's face it, jackrabbits, deer, elk, they're a little faster than cattle, so it's an easier target too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, much tastier meal. The animals are basically sitting ducks. They're fenced in. I mean, it doesn't get much easier for that. And then it's just it's a very plentiful meal and plenty of it. And nobody's doing anything to deter that. So if you're a wolf, why would you not? Why would you not? Okay, well, we're kind of reaching the time frame where, we need to let people get back to work. But is there anything that we're missing here that we definitely should have covered that we haven't covered, guys?
Well, so from my perspective, and I mentioned the misinformation that I think leads to a lot of the irrational, emotional fantasy with the wolves. I would just tell people, check the sources. When you see on social media, oftentimes all these magical things that the wolves do. It's not real. The real world is very, very different. And even the experts, in quotes, that are owned by Center for Biological Diversity and other groups are very suspect. It's not the real world. If you want to see the real world, go out and look at it with your own eyes. It's not what's being portrayed.
Yeah. Yeah, in the last podcast, Richard, we were talking about awareness and the Highway 97 video, where those are you guys familiar with that highway? Where it's just people were kind of videoing these wolves and they're kind of watching them and then just almost the complete surprise and a little bit of shock that they're like, wait, oh wow, they're chasing cattle. Oh my God, and then it's horrific. I proposed it last time on that podcast, but I really thought a lot about it. I feel like there should be this is messed up. And Wyatt, I'm sorry that I'm even advocating this because that's it's like your family members, but a really well done drone video of killing killing cattle needs to be produced and needs to be released. And, it sounds like these things are just majestic and they are, they're beautiful creatures. And this isn't a wolf hate thing. But the reality is they aren't the original California wolf. They're an imposter that is a wolf that was never here. They're bigger. They are much. The research I did was that the original California wolves are more solitary. These are pack killing machines, and they're really incredibly efficient. They're getting better and better. They're highly intelligent, and the killing is going to continue to go up with the explosion of birth rates that are happening. And we need to start educating people now on what the death that they bring looks like. And I mean, as horrific as this is, to even say out loud, I don't want the video to be. It needs to be cattle now before it's children later. And I know that sounds extreme, and a lot of people are like, no, that'll never happen. Are you sure? Because look at what's happened over the last 3 years. We went from the sheriff basically going, not even really on our radar, to him basically saying, I get 2-3 calls a week and I'm personally handling this because my deputies are already overwhelmed. They don't need this on their plate. And at some point, I love you, John, but you got a huge county to cover, and there's only one of you, buddy. So we got to figure out something that basically puts the shock and awe out there of the real world. We were talking on the last podcast, even on Facebook, you have to click like multiple times to even view the kill, right? It's just, they don't, everything is so suppressed. And yes, I recognize, it's not a pretty picture, but if it's not, but it's the truth. And so we've got to get that out there. So I don't know. Any other last minute ideas besides Perry's crazy video option that might be effective?
Well, I certainly, I hope that, we do live in a wonderful part of the country, and, we're all of us here are generations in this business and in this area. And I certainly I hope, and again, I know that this is hopefully not wishful thinking, that the state will take some steps to help us a little bit more. And again, I really think by having a delisted zone and having some federal or some federal help to maybe get us there and have lethal control as a tool that the state can use, certainly would go a long way. And I hope that somebody at the state can hear that and will try to help.
Yeah. 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 Well, the impacts and the depredations are growing at an exponential level. And if we don't figure out how to get in front of this, it's going to get away from us really fast. In fact, I feel like it's already gotten away from us. I really do. And Wyatt, I'm so grateful that you were on this podcast, buddy. And I'm super sorry about what you have dealt with as a family, as a ranch, and as a business owner. I'm so sorry for what you've dealt with, and thank you for sharing your story with us. John, thank you for spending the time with us here today, just to say, hey, this is a big impact even on law enforcement. My hands are tied, and there's very little I can do. But I really want to commend you for being on those committees and being in the department's ear and really trying to be at the forefront of solutions. And I can't imagine the time that takes and all the conflicting priorities that you have to deal with as a sheriff. God bless you for being on the front of this and really trying to come up with solutions and understanding that it starts with changing at the policy level and the legislative level. We can bitch and complain all we want, but if we don't have people out there like you just really on the forefront on those committees and being part of that, and really telling people what's really happening out there, it's never going to happen. So thank you so much. And Richard, you were awesome just from, hey, you've got the ranching background, but you also have been in county government and government in general for so long. You understand and kind of bringing that connection between private industry, that Wyatt is at the forefront and you're also in the forefront, but also from the policies and how it works at a county and state and federal level. That was great. So really want to thank you all for being here today. Thank you so much. And I really hope this gets widely shared because it's an important message. And thanks again for everybody being here today.
Thank you, Perry.
Thank you, Perry.
Thank you.